with Renee.
Yo. We wait all week and all day for more. Saturdays with Renee.
Yes. What's up, world? Welcome back for another edition of Saturdays with Renee, featuring Renee Johnson. I'm Jared Ball. This is episode 82 right here on Black Liberation Media. Please like, share, subscribe, support the Patreon. All the links are in the show description. Renee.
What up? What's going on, man?
Yeah, man. 82. How you
That's
feeling?
crazy. That's crazy.
Our show is now,
I
we're on our way to retirement.
I also noticed that I just so happened to catch that we crossed 47,000 subscribers before I know. We're like eking on 50K, which I can rock with that.
Hey, listen, again, once you're demonetized, the algorithm also slows you down. So that we're getting this level of attention and support is remarkable. So salute to all the remixers who, in addition to like, sharing, subscribing, commenting, putting these shows in their socials, are making it happen. So, oh no, Pancho got workshops.
I know. I saw.
I got to get to his new book. I keep
Oh,
thinking
did you finally get it?
No. Or at least I don't think I did. So, no.
Did you ever figure out if there's a way to do a post appeal to YouTube about the demonetization?
No, you know what? I didn't follow up on that. That's you know what? I have to write it down.
All right. So this means I have to put it on my text Jared and remind him to do the thing.
Yeah. But I will at least say it has been elevated to being written down.
There we go.
So sometimes that helps. But yeah.
It's wild, man.
Yeah.
All right. So as I told you prior to us going live, I got a note from Josie. This is my life, right? So
salute to Josie.
So as everyone knows, I write for Public Square Amplified on the side. I help with the website.
Award-winning author.
Correct. That is right. She yells at me all the time, by the way, like, you have to add the award-winning. And I'd be like, all right, man.
I would be terrible with it. That's all I'd be saying. Hi, I'm the award-winning Jared Ball. Hey, man, what's your name? Oh, I'm the award-winning Jared.
I guess I should make the adjustment because I've been told that it's actually really rare for journalists to get like any kind of like written recognition. So I guess I should, I guess I should work on that. All right. So Josie wants me to make sure that everyone is aware that today is World Press Freedom Day, which I will admit I was not aware of prior to Josie sending me the text message.
And until you said that 3 minutes ago, I wasn't either.
So World Press Freedom Day is really a day to kind of honor journalism, honor journalists, consider how much our actual like mainstream press is under the buckle of absolute horseshit and not giving anybody anything, not presenting any real information. It's all part of the propaganda, which is why everybody should be taking the time, as some folks have indicated in the chat, to share information about spaces like Black Liberation Media, to share information about newsrooms like Public Square Amplified, and to make sure that, are these independent outlets like ours, and there's a lot of them, right? Like there's a list, right? get the support if it's possible. So I say all of that to make sure that people understand that if, you know, the freedom of the press, it's murky here, right? Like they say we have it. It's questionable whether or not we actually have it. But, you know, there's spaces like ours and others where, you know, the goal is to continue to make sure that there's real news, real information, and real education coming out from independent press rooms. So please go out and find your local press, you know, press space, media room, newsroom, local outlet, whoever. If you can manage to support, you know, monetarily, that's always grateful. I'll put a note in for blkliberationmedia.org where you can donate and become a monthly donor. But it's important that we support, you know, support freedom of the press, support those local outlets, support the folks that are doing the real work. And then a final shout out to remember that, you know, shutting down the press is very important to the mainstream narrative, which is why over 200 Palestinian journalists have been killed, right? Because the goal is to prevent you from getting real information. So always think of, whenever you can, that there are people who are putting their lives on the line, their freedom on the line, in order to make sure that you are getting the information that you need in order to get off your wheel, your hamster wheel that capitalism strives to keep you on.
The greatest benefit to, if any at all, to the PhD in journalism was having some dedicated time, not institutionalized, but on my own with some others, to study some of these radical traditions and histories and the criticism of media and journalism that often are ignored. So absolutely salute to this whole approach. A lot of our heroes and sheroes and others have been journalists. The emancipatory journalism concept I work with comes out of all of these anti-colonial struggles. I Mix What I Like is an homage to Steve Biko, whose journalism in Azania did that work. Karl Marx, whose birthday is this week, was a journalist, did radical journalism. I mean, everybody. Malcolm X was a radical journalist and media maker. So yeah, it's an important legacy to continue. Robert Mabel Williams, everybody, like so many people, Amilcar Cabral talked intimately about the role of radio and anti-colonial struggle. And having certain journalism and press outlets. And then lastly, just even, Orasami Burton has me revisiting Stuart Hall's work, which predates Chomsky and Herman's manufacturing consent, and where policing the crisis, talking about media and journalism being used as weapons against us in setting narratives. And so it's very important that we support people doing this kind of work. So, yeah.
So Josie, you can get off my back now. Chitty Macha always got it.
All time. That's funny.
He always got it.
Ida B. Wells, of course, absolutely.
Of course, 100%.
Yeah. So I mean, so it's essential.
Essential. So Josie, I'll bring you a ladder and you can climb down off my back now, because I got the assignment. Look, I tell my child and my husband that all the time when they're haranguing me for stuff. I'd be like, "Can I bring you a ladder now, and you can get off my back?"
Climb all the way down. That's funny. I'm gonna have to borrow that one. That's funny.
Whew. All right, so we've got a jam-packed show today, which we're gonna try and get through all the info because it's a lot of information, and we got a set of guests coming first and then another guest coming later. And so we're going to work on this. We're going to get the information out. But as long as our guests are ready, you can give the thumbs up to Jared if you're all good to go, and we can bring everybody in.
Let's go. Welcome, 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 welcome.
Welcome, everybody.
Hello.
Thank you so much. Thank you. very quickly, Jared, in our run sheet, there is a link to a 1 minute and change YouTube clip. And I feel like this might be a great little like intro to what we're about to do. And I think you all will recognize the faces in the video, and then we'll let everybody introduce themselves.
All right, here we go.
Sorry, this is me giving Jared stuff to do at the last minute with no warning. My bad. Jared.
No, it's StreamYard Studio. I still blame StreamYard for their clunky studio setup, but anyway.
For us in Metro Arts, I think of it as just like 3 or 4 things. You know, first we have to reframe the narrative, right? Like it's not just neutral or universal. There are particular histories attached to everything we do. Second is how do we redistribute the power, right? Like she shouldn't have to come and ask. We should be out there. If you look at what the health department's doing, they have social workers who go out into the community to see what the community need is. So why isn't Metro Arts doing that? Why is someone asking and then being told no, right? Too, and then also again going back to the new Eurocentric concept of art, right? Like it can only happen in a theater. It can only happen in this way, whereas an organic gathering of people coming together and creating art is not seen as fitting a model, right? Like so those are all racist structures in place in a system, and then connecting it back to even other local issues, right? Like we had never funded the Fisk Jubilee Singers in the history of Metro Arts, right? 150-year-old legacy organization. Right. We have never funded the gallery that Jamal Sheets runs at Fisk, right? So how does that happen? That's what I want to know, right? And so as part of reframing and redistributing power, we want to shift resources to communities that have been kept out of it. Wait a minute now. So, wait a minute. You want to reshift power and resources to marginalized communities? Stop it. That's the word. No, don't. You out of control. But that's too radical.
I found that this morning. I was like, oh, this is so perfect. So I'm going to turn it over to our guests, and then Daniel, if you don't mind starting, and then you can send it to whoever you want to send it to next, and then the last person can go. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, everyone. I'm Daniel Singh. I'm a dancer, choreographer. I grew up in India. And a kind of interesting origin story is that in India, well, my parents were really trying to find opportunities for me to engage in Western arts, right? Like they made sure I took my French literature classes or piano classes, but I never saw a live Bharatanatyam performance in India while I was growing up in the city that is the biggest city to Bharatanatyam artists and has the oldest institution there. So it wasn't until I came to the US that I got to see Bharatanatyam performance live, Indian dance performance live, right? So that's the irony of how colonialism plays out. And since I've been in the US, I have straddled a lot of different careers. I worked as an IT director for many years. And at the same time, in the last year of my computer science degree, I took a ballet class, which kind of changed my life. And I decided to switch majors. And you can imagine the conversation with my immigrant parents who moved here and were working 100 hours a week to put me through college when I say I'm switching from computer science to dance. But that was transformational for me, switching to dance. And so as I work in dance, I try to think about what I can do to make a difference. And most recently, I've been working with Justin Lang of the Hillel Consulting for about 2 years, who's really helped me think about anti-colonial, anti-racist approaches to the arts. And he talks about it from the Zapatista movement, where all of us have to find a way to get a chink in the wall of racism and break it open, and whatever field you're in, right? So he's been really influential in helping me learn how to be better about not falling back on my old liberal politics and analysis. And then more recently, even than that, I've been working with another advisor, mentor called Vidya Shankar, who's helping me connect it back to my South Asian colonial, anti-colonial struggles as well. So with that, I'll pass it over to Christine.
Well, hello, thank you. I'm Christine Hall. I'm based here in Nashville. I'm a multidisciplinary artist who enjoys working on non-commercial projects in community, uh, facilitated a community arts center, um, curated a gallery where we focused on platforming emerging artists, minority artists, outsider artists, hosted and organized many events, including for 8 years, I did a poetry open mic. And on the last day of that, I was invited to join a public grants editing panel, which is where I connected with Daniel and Lydia. And Lydia.
I always feel like everyone's bio is so short compared to knowing these two for so long and feeling how expansive people are. But hello, everyone. I'm Lydia. I was raised kind of in the Nashville area in the suburbs, and my parents are both Coptic Egyptian Christians. So we come from a minority from Egypt, a marginalized community, and then and here as well, we're a community that's made invisible as well, even though it's the working class community that's built this city through the 90s. So my father's a small business owner, and so I spent a lot of time in the South Nashville area, which is where a lot of my community members are based. Egypt is the country with the second most foreign-born residents in Nashville. So there's tens of thousands of us. So it's a pretty large community. And I know a lot of people, when they think Nashville, they're not thinking of the Arab community or not thinking of Arabic as the third most spoken language, but it's a pretty large community. And I was there kind of since the beginning of that growth to see my community grow and build the city up. So I got into this conversation in 2019. I had just finished my master's on colonialism and tourism in Palestine among Coptic migrants and Palestinian residents. And I was moved to come back to our city and start an organization with a good friend of mine who was a workers organizer here. And so In Mahabba started from that kind of inception to say enough was enough of how what was going on in Nashville at the time. And also in 2019, we had a new mayor. And at that time, someone approached me from the office and said, Metro Arts, the agency that's in charge of the kind of the arts grant making world here in Nashville, for the inauguration of the mayor, brought in a list of just all white artists. And so he had approached me and he said, there's no way in the year of our Lord 2019 that a Nashville government agency is giving a list of all white artists for the mayor's inauguration. And so he was asking me for any Arab artists. And at the time I didn't have my list. I was like, I'll contact a few in my list, but like, you know, it's 3 days and it's really depressing that, you know, you have a government agency that's in charge of grant making and doesn't have these lists. And so that's how I kind of spiraled into this conversation in the midst of coming back into a city and then also starting our own organization here to build our power among the Arab communities here. So, yep.
All right. Thank you. And Jared, it's hot as hell already. It's only 11 o'clock and I'm sweating in my house. So I turned on the AC. So if it's too loud in the background, I'll sweat. Let me know. So Lydia mentioned the Metro Arts. And so I know a lot of what's been happening in Nashville is kind of surrounding some of the decisions that were happening at Metro Arts, the funding, these Thrive grants. It seems like a lot of messiness that was going on. And I know you all filed a Title VI complaint and eventually won that complaint also. So I'm not sure between the three of you, like who would be the best person to give kind of the history of Metro Arts. But if we could start with the history so that people understand kind of the background of that organization and how the funding came to be, then we can kind of go into like how that has transformed into, you know, what always everything with funding and people in minority communities turns into racism. And so if we could talk about that history first, that would be great.
I'll start, and then Christine and Lydia, please fill in as you if I leave any gaps there. I wanted to zoom back a little bit to even the founding of NEA. The NEA was founded by Lyndon Johnson, and it was founded in the wake of the Black Panther Party's work, the Poor People's Campaign, the Kerner Commission, the Vietnam War student protests on campuses. So instead of actually giving the demands of all these community organizers, they created the Great Society, and out of which NEA was formed, right? Just to pacify the crowds, bread and circus kind of approach. So the NEA from in the beginning used to fund individual artists. And in the 1990s, there were the NEA four artists who apparently did artwork that some elected officials found that they didn't like it, and so they forced the NEA to change the funding from individual artist funding to organizational funding, and that created this whole spate of nonprofit industrial complex in the arts. But also it created a sort of censorship for the artists. So now so the thought was these arts organizations will have board, we can control who's on the boards, therefore we can control what these artists are able to do as their work, right? So that's the background of the NEA. With Metro Arts, it's about a 37-year-old organization now. It was created because the symphony was going bankrupt. And the wealthy philanthropist, Martha Ingram in Nashville, who stood up many Eurocentric arts organizations like the symphony, ballet, opera, felt that the symphony had to be rescued by taxpayer dollars because it's an asset to the whole community. Meanwhile, who can buy at today's rate $100 ticket, $40 for parking, and if you go with the family, then suddenly you're looking at like $450 in tickets, right? Like so they call it a public asset, but the person who accesses these services is really like ruling class people, right? So, but she was able to influence the then mayor to stand up an arts commission to fund the large organizations, which were predominantly white-led, white-serving, downtown, not where the community lived. And so Metro Arts came into being. And then in about 2015, because of a lot of community feedback, complaints, they founded a committee called Anti-Racist Task Force, ART. And then that transitioned into CARE, Committee on Anti-Racism and Equity. So that's because of all of the inequities that the artists were raising up, that committee was founded. And so fast forward to 2022, the previous ED had left and they were looking for a new director to come in and implement equity changes. And for me, I was in DC at this time, and I was excited from the outside to see a committee on anti-racism and equity. And I was like, this is where I want to work, right? Like I'm passionate about equity. And I want to work from an anti-racist perspective rather than the milquetoast DEIA lane. So I interviewed for the job, and in my interview, I was very candid that this is what I want to do. I want to work in the anti-racist space, and if that's not what you want me to do, I'm not the right fit. And they all, the commissioners, the committee members, all said that's exactly what they were looking for and brought me on. So when I got there, like I said, in the clip that you played, we started looking at our funding history. We found that we had never funded the Fisk University Jubilee Singers, a 150-year-old Grammy Award-winning a cappella, all-Black choir. We had never funded them. And I was like, what's going on here? We had never funded them. And then I started looking at the funding history. And in the 35 years that we had funded, 90% of the funding had gone to organizations that made over $1 million in their operating budget. And you can again imagine who they might be. White-led, white-serving organizations. And then 70% of the funding had gone to only 10 organizations, even though our funding portfolio was about 75 organizations receiving funding. 70% of the funding for 35 years had gone to 10 organizations. of which 4 were stood up by Martha Ingram, one individual, wealthy white philanthropist, right? So suddenly someone's hobby projects becomes the taxpayer's burden. And so we saw that this was not equitable. We started revising our grants. Until then, the staff and commission would just get together and edit the grants, change the questions around, and just put it out there. And I was like, no, we have to have the community here and say what questions helps you shine best in this project, right? Like, because we asked the same question of someone who's going to get $5,000 from us and someone who's going to get $200,000 with a budget of $150,000, like the Country Music Hall of Fame. They have a whole team like of development staff and grant writing. It's not fair, right? So we brought we brought community members, artists, arts organizations in to help us revision this application process. At that point, we had between 15 to 18 questions on an application. And so if you're getting $500 from us, you had to answer all of those 15 questions. So Lydia and Christine were part of the editing process. We simplified the grant editing process from the 15 questions to 5 questions if you have a budget of $500,000 or more. And if you had a budget of under $500,000, you only had to answer 3 questions. And in the first year, our applications for individual artists went from 22 to 175. So it shows that there was a barrier, and we lowered it. We didn't remove the barrier, but we lowered it a little bit. I'm still working in the reform lane, right? Like in no way doing anything radical or creating anything outside the system. But at the same time, then I went back and looked at the Bureau of Labor Statistics to see how many artists are in Nashville. And this is, again, like, you take statistics with a grain of salt. The Bureau of Labor was reporting that there were between 15,000 to 25,000 artists in Nashville, and they were tallying people who were reporting FTE, full-time equivalent status, or a half-time equivalent status on their 990s. So it did not count individual artists at all. It only counted people who were associated with large organizations. So if you take that at its face value, we're still only giving 175 grants to a community that could be between $15,000 to $25,000, 15,000 to 25,000 individual artists, right? So all these gaps were there. And then we wanted to move more in the direction of equity. And that's when I think we needed the help of Lydia and Christine to come in as community organizers to help us. And I think they can add a little bit more context to that piece of it as well.
Yeah, I'll add something about the funding pools that Metro Arts has, because that's where I came into. So in 2019, when I started that conversation with Metro Arts, I was told that I could not apply to the general operating pool of funds on the basis that we were not an arts-only organization. So even if we had arts programming, we had to do only arts. And that seemed very arbitrary to me and also very discriminatory to me, because I was like, there are so many BIPOC-led orgs that they can't just do arts. I'm going to butcher the quote, but the Palestinian artist who said, I would love to write poetry that's not political once the, I'm going to butcher it. But once the warships or the drones stop their noise, right? And so that's how I've always kind of felt about this conversation, is that it's not appropriate for many of our communities to have only arts-only organizations. But we have to do multiple other things to support our community members and to bring them in and to build power. It's not just a concert hall that's going to do it, especially for working class people. So I had that conversation with staff at that point. I was saying, it's a shame that you all do not want to invest in organizations in the city that are doing multiple levels of work with artists who don't see themselves as full-time artists, with people who don't see art as maybe a career, but see it as something they do on the weekend, as something that they share, as something that they can keep their language through music, that these are programs that we're paying our taxes to, and we're not seeing any of that benefit come back into our communities. It's going all downtown. And I was told at that point to apply to their new pool of funding that they had started in 2014, which was called Thrive. When I looked at Thrive, it was like a very extensive application process. So it was going to take me hours to complete. And at that point, I was, unpaid staff at this organization, and I was not going to spend hours and hours on a grant application like this. And then it was maximum $9,000. So if you can imagine an artist budget for a $9,000 project, that's probably for an individual artist. It's not going to be for a collaborative project. It's going to barely cover supplies, space. This is pennies. And so I told Metro Arts staff, it's also a misnomer to call this fund Thrive, because what you're doing is you're throwing crumbs at community members. You're taking our tax dollars, you're throwing crumbs at us, while there are people who are sitting at the table taking third, fourth servings of the feast we made for them. And I, at the time, called it criminal, and I did not want to participate within the Metro Arts. I was like, if you all can't get serious about distributing tax dollars equitably, I'm not going to be able to support this infrastructure. Because at the time they were like, we'd love to listen to you, we'd love to hear your feedback. And I was of years of that, I was like, I'm out. And in 2022, that's when Daniel came on as the new ED, and I gave it one last chance in the fall of 2022 after calling them a criminal mafia organization. I was like, I'll give it one last try. And that's when I saw all the hope in the community come back to life, feeling like we do have a say in the process. This can be a democratic process within Metro, and we can shape the future that we want. So we were sitting with organizations that, had traditionally received funds, but were much smaller organizations. So they were receiving not equitable funding. And hearing from people like myself and from other people of color who were saying we had never received funding. Some people received a little, and then there were so many hundreds of thousands of people in the city who were not benefiting from their tax dollars going into the arts. So it was like a moment where everybody was listening to each other and having the best intention for each other and wanting to move forward with each other. So I'll let Christine add, because 2022 was the pivotal year, and then all hell broke loose after. But
It did. Yeah, because we finally started to move the needle as a community toward the community. I was only peripherally aware of Metro Arts until 2022 at that public grants editing session. Before that, I had worked with a couple local artists on their Thrive projects. I saw the limitations and strictures. I saw how inaccessible and obfuscated the process, and I did not want to directly get involved with my own projects that I was working on, and with the collaborations I was doing in community. It just felt better and more doable for us to just do what we do. And I know there's so many organizations who seek funding through, for instance, Patreon, and there are opportunities like that for the community to directly support. Mutual aid was always an ethos that I really enjoyed. But when I had a chance to be invited in, it felt like we had a person on the inside with Daniel at the helm there at Metro Arts. That there was a CARE committee, a committee for anti-racism and equity. These were signs that perhaps we were making actual progress. Perhaps we were all getting a turn to hear, one another and share our own voices. And, I thought that was really exciting, because I know that creativity is the life of a community, and that elevating the culture is going to help every one of us in our personal and greater connections. So yeah, I was really excited to participate in something like that, and to hear other artists around the room echoing the same concerns, and to have those concerns then be logged and turned into actual policy that was presented to the commission and approved. Yeah, it was a golden moment. And yeah, we made some gains, and immediately we started to see the backlash.
Interesting. So I'm curious about the makeup of Metro Arts, right? So Daniel, you're no longer there, correct? And Lydia, you are still there, right?
No, I'm definitely one of their haters on the outside.
Okay, so you're also no longer there.
No.
Okay.
But you're on the care committee, right, Lydia?
If it still exists, well,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. So can we talk about what the makeup is of Metro Arts? Because I'm trying to understand, like, you know, when Daniel comes into this organization and comes with the anti-racism mindset, is it only white people and Daniel in the room? Like, are there Black folks involved? Is there, you know, like, is the community involved? Is the community allowed space within Metro Arts? Like, can you explain a little bit about that, if it's possible?
Yeah. So when I got there, you know, like my biggest source of support was Mattia Powell. She was a vice chair. She was going to become chair. And a Black woman from Nashville lived there for a long time, understood everything that the community was going through. So I had her support. But in general, the makeup is that the commissioners are picked by the mayor, right? And typically, who has access to the mayor is people who write checks to the mayor's campaign, right? So Mattia was an anomaly in that sense. She was well respected in the community, but everyone else pretty much got on the commission because they had either done something for the mayor or were able to do something for the mayor or the council, for example, right? So or they were on the boards of the ruling class organizations, the Ballet, Symphony, Opera, Cheekwood, and Country Music Hall of Fame. So they might have been on the board there, or they might have staff. That's been the historical makeup of the commission. And so I had Mattia's support, and I had to, and the staff, when I got there, 3 managers, one in grants, and I forget the other 2 departments they were, had either resigned or were forced out because they were trying to advance anti-racist policies in their departments, right? Whether it was grants or public art or any other work we do. So 3 of them had been forced out. The ED had resigned. So I knew I was getting into a difficult situation, but I had extensive conversations with Mattia saying, are you going to stick with me on this? I can't do this alone. And she said she would, and she did for as long as she could, right? So I had the support of Mattia. She helped me navigate it. But the commission in general, they might have a few token artist representatives or working class artists on the commission. But if you get on the commission, you can't apply for any grants. And each commission appointment is for 3 to 4 years. So that means a working class artist has to give up 3 to 4 years of income to serve on the commission, because they said it was a conflict of interest for them to be on the commission. But it didn't seem to be a conflict of interest for the commissioners to be on the boards of the other wealthy organizations or be working as staff at the other organizations. It was only the individual artists that was seen as a conflict of interest.
Can I just say that I really commend you for trying so hard to ignore your bird? Like,
I'm sorry.
No,
I'm sorry.
Don't be sorry. Listen, Jared always got birds outside his window. We're familiar with the birds. It needed to be said. Don't apologize at all. It had to be said. We all hear the birds, y'all.
Yeah,
it's gonna be okay.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I have 2 parrots, and this is the only space I can take a meeting in. So, anyway, so the commission makeup has been largely dictated by the ruling class, to be short about it. And I don't know if it's changed recently, Lydia and Christine.
Okay. So is there any understanding, because I'm really, what I'd like to kind of engage the conversation is, given what all is happening, what is the role that the community is playing right now within trying to, fix the situation as it is? Nashville itself in general is like a tricky place, right? Like it's not really, I'm not a big fan of the term minority either. A couple of people made the comment because worldwide it's just not like accurate, right? But Nashville by population is only, it's like almost 50-50, right? Non-white versus white. Like it's not actually like a real, there's this massive majority of one particular group. And so I'm trying to make sure that for our audience, we really engage in what the work looks like right now to combat the actual racism that is occurring within the arts community. Like, what is the role that the community is playing in trying to fight this, if there is any role that the community is playing, and how can this like issue with the funding and the discrepancy in the funding be addressed from outside of the Metro Arts organization, right? Like I want to make sure that we're focused truly on like, how do we assist the community in fighting this problem, right? Like if it's the mayor that needs to be called out, then what do they need to do? If it's the underfunding, because I understand that the funding for, like, there's a limited pool for the funding. It's something like $3.6 million. But there's no, like, if the funding was actually coming from like a percentage of the pool that comes to Nashville, then you would have exponentially more funds to work with, which would allow more people in the arts to be funded. So I'm just curious about like the actual battle, the battle that needs to be waged from within the community against what's happening.
Yeah, I think Christine can speak more to this as well. Starting off, I think in continuing the story, it becomes a lot more obvious how powerful the community has stood up, because there was a high chance when we filed that Title VI complaint in August of 2023 about the discriminatory funding. So many people were like, "You're not going to get that money back," and there's no reason for you to file a complaint. And for me, it was really about the narrative. I know that for a lot of people who organize and who fight back, you lose a lot. So you become very used to losing and you have to have very thick skin. But the point is that even in maybe something that the outside would see as a loss, you're winning in terms of the narrative that you're chipping away slowly and slowly. And, to see now 2 years later, where we had started in August of 2023, where people were calling us crazy and you're not, this is the government, what are y'all doing? Just take the L and move on. It happens all the time, to now where we've developed a sense of like, people say this is wrong and something has to happen. We've given so many community members, not given, but I think we've allowed ourselves as a community in Nashville to say, what is wrong, and we're not going to let it bypass us every single time. So like even in the 2 years of changing over the narrative, even when we started this work with the Title VI complaint, the work was going on before then, but the Title VI work that began in August of 2023, many people also were like, you need to talk to them, talk to the commission, and reason with them, dialogue it with them. And we're telling us, we're being unreasonable people. We're being very aggressive. Don't call it racism. That's just how politics is. To now, people are very, oh, this is a white supremacist commission. And these people cannot be shifted until there is a force, until there is a demand. So I'll let Christine continue the narrative from like what was happening, because Christine ran hugely successful campaign in 2023 to secure 2 million for Thrive Artists.
Right. So, yeah, Thrive is the only program that matches the demographics of Nashville, which, as was pointed out, consists of both the global majority as well as many other small groups that are worthy of equal attention, if not greater, because in equity, sometimes we need to spend a little extra time listening to those voices that have been pushed to the fringes. So, whether that was in council or whether that was in concert with CARE, we were developing language around being able to bring in the artists who had never been reached before. They were expanding the Thrive program, but also reaching out and connecting with people who may not have even been aware that this funding existed before. And these barriers that we talk about, while we haven't ever gotten to the place of removing them before, we're lowering those barriers. They had been so effective that not only did people not know that that money was there, they had no point of access to learning of that because there was no presence in the communities. And that's something that we still fight for to this day. There are many small groups which altogether make up the bulk of what Nashville is and what we have to offer, but their focus has been around the downtown area, specifically serving already privileged peoples. And we were working together to bring forth a realization of each community having projects that are done with artists leading from that community, coming from within the community itself, elevating those voices from within the community. And when we are able to recognize that and directly fund that, it changes the face of art wherever you are here in Nashville, certainly, to look more like the people in our communities rather than something that's been imposed and dictated and some sort of Western idealization, which is completely irrelevant to what our life is actually like from day to day. Holding these things up as ideals when really they've been the downfall of most people as they go about their daily life. So, yes, in concert with CARE, the Committee for Anti-Racism and Equity, we developed a letter that we, as a community, sent over 12,000 of to Metro Council, calling for the direct funding of the Thrive program. There was $2 million in funding hanging out there. It was first earmarked for the large institutions, but we got through to the council members. They heard us. They said it was through our advocacy that we won that $2 million, and they showed up on the council floor. They showed up at the Arts Equity Mayoral Forum. They showed up at the Arts Commission meetings and specifically said they heard the community and they wanted that funding to go direct to the community. But as soon as they, actually devoted that funding to the community, we had those special interests rising up and asking for a return to the status quo. And they already had the ear of the powers that be. It was an entrenched system.
Interesting. So I just want to make sure that I'm clear on, because this was the decision that happened. The 17th is the only date that's in. There was like something that happened between the 17th and the 20th of a month. And there was a decision that was made, and then that decision was rolled back, and those were the funds that were supposed to go. I just want to make sure that I clarify for folks.
Yeah, so this $2 million was earmarked for the large organizations, again, like the Country Music Hall of Fame, Ballet, Symphony, Opera, Cheekwood, and they got the National Museum of African American Music to join their group, so they could get some cover of saying they're not predominantly a white organization, and so the $2 million was earmarked for them. And so I said, no, it has to go through Metro Arts, and Metro Arts has to give it to the individual artists. And so the commissioners, the current chair of the commission, asked me for language to justify why this money should come to Metro Arts and not go directly to these large budget, white-led, white-serving organizations, except for NAMAM. And so the community wrote, as Christine and Lydia led the charge and got us 12,000 letters to the council and redirected the money to come to Metro Arts to give it to the artists. So we did vote to give it to the artists, but then a commissioner who had told me that affirmative action does not affect the arts previously, or there are workarounds if affirmative action ruling does come down. Even though he told me there are workarounds, he used the affirmative action ruling for Harvard as a way to undo this shift towards Thrive artists. So that's what happened between the 17th and the 20th. Commissioners voted to fund Thrive, but then this commissioner who was on the board, who was an attorney, who had friends with the legal department at Metro Arts, called them up and said, this violates the affirmative action ruling that's come down, even though the affirmative action ruling clearly states that this is a narrow decision focused on higher education. These two institutions should not be interpreted broadly. Metro Legal chose to go with this commissioner's interpretation, and they asked us to take another vote, and that's when we lost that money.
I'll add to the important narrative here that they were trying to privatize those tax dollars, that $2 million. And so when we were able to secure that back to the community, that already had ticked them off. And I always refer, there's actually, so the July meeting where the commission votes equitably to move that $2 million to the community, there's only an audio recording of it. There's no stream on YouTube of it, unfortunately, and there's only some notes. Once the call is made to Metro Legal, the legal office department within the city, to intervene on behalf of the art monopolies to take back that $2 million, there's another meeting on August 17th. And during that meeting, there were dozens of artists who came out to speak to enforce the July, or ask that the July vote be upheld. That equity be upheld. That $2 million was won by the community. And of course, also within this narrative, the art monopolies will always tell you, like, the reason Metro Arts' budget has never increased for the arts for the past 2 decades is because you all need us. You all need us in the mayor's office. You all need us to advocate for you, you peasants, right? So there's this narrative of like, we are dependent on them in that sense, when in reality, we won that money. We didn't need them to come out and speak to council. We did not need them to speak to the mayor's office. And that kind of narrative still is perpetuated today, of that, you know, we need the art monopolies. We need the ruling class. We need the rich to exist, because what would we do? And so August was a very powerful moment, because it was dozens and dozens of artists, and compared to like what, 3 white executives who came in and said, you know, what am I going to do if I lose $10,000? And crying in front of the council about something, you know, and you have artists who are like, this is the first time I'm receiving arts funding, and I'm going to be doing a dance project, a film project in North Nashville, or, you know, a mural in South Nashville. So it was a very powerful moment, and I will always remember it because we were seated there for hours listening to artist upon artist upon artist speak their truth, and then to see the commission defund them will always be like just a something in my mind that I carry, to see how brutally savage it is to hear people say, I will be bringing this into the community, and then to see this commission just vote it down automatically and say we have promises to the art monopolies. And if you see that video on YouTube, you can't see the public comments, but you can see behind Daniel in that YouTube video all the art monopoly executives. So these are like, you know, they make $300K a year executives who came out to South Nashville where this meeting was being held, which is the very heavily BIPOC segregated area of Nashville. And they were all seated behind Daniel, and their faces as the decisions were being made, and like the worry on their face, even though they clinched it with an 8-7 vote to defund. So I just want to, August 17th, 2023, it's on YouTube, and you can even see the dynamic. in and of itself, it's like a little art masterpiece of seeing them really, really want to, the violence on their face, feeling that they could lose, and to feel that energy in the room. Daniel, did you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that they didn't have to say anything. That's how power operates, right? Like they didn't have to testify. They just came in their suits and high heels and red power suits, and they just sat silently. And just that presence either threatened or reminded the commissioners that they had allegiances that don't have to be spoken, don't have to be made transparent, right? And so the commission voted in favor of that. And Mattia resigned right after that. And so I lost my biggest ally, right? She was the commission chair. She was a champion for equity. She said, in that commission meeting, you'll also hear her saying, we've been talking about doing this for over 8 years. From the time, this was the second appointment on the commission. So she had served 3 or 4 years and she was appointed again. And she said, we have never done anything about it. Here's a chance for us to do something. And even with all of that, we got voted down. And so that's the other thing, right? Like power doesn't have to be actually manifest. It can just be in the background, and especially old money never shows itself, but we know that the old money is running the city. And when I first got to Nashville, they told me that 10 families really run Nashville. And that was the day it was made clear to me that the 10 families still run Nashville, regardless of whatever democratic facade it has.
I'm just forgive the interruption, but
now listen, that's called my boy. You know nothing about that.
That was it. Real money doesn't show itself. That's it. Thank you. Please continue.
Yeah.
No, Renee, you had asked who needs to be called out, right? Like I have a list, right? And then you all can add also because you are there doing the work, Christine and Alia. The mayor has to be called out because he ran on a platform of being a progressive candidate, of being for the people. And then he also committed in a mayoral debate that the community, Lydia and Christine and Cynthia Harris, community leaders in the arts, organized for mayoral candidates and said, will you commit to 1% of the city budget for the arts? And they all, every single candidate, conservative or Democratic, agreed to that. And here we are 3 years into his admin. We haven't seen any of that, right? So the mayor's office definitely has to be called for it. The city council has to be called out, but the city council can only move what the mayor's office has already designated as the budget. They can't add to the budget, right? So they have less power. The commissioners definitely have to be called out. And I would add, the city's DEIA office told me that what we were trying to do is what equity looks like in practice. And I said, will you come and say that to us in the commission meeting? They said, no, we can't take a stance publicly. So I'm like, wait, you're the DEI office? You're saying you can't take a stance publicly on something that's equity related? What does that mean, right? And then even staff at the MHRC, the Metro Human Relations Commission, kept telling me, please don't use the term anti-racist because it puts the hackles up on people. Can you couch it as something else? And I was like, no, maybe that's how you want to work, but this is how we want to work. We are taking back our narrative and we want to work in this way. And I think we have to address it from the terms of reparations, right? This is money that was stolen from taxpayers, artists who are paying into this for the last 35 years and haven't been receiving any. So how do the big 6 or big 7 organizations now make reparations? They've had a 35-year ramp, and some years they were getting as many as $250,000. And can you imagine what $250,000 20 years ago would do to a global majority arts organization, right? Like instead of just devoting this 70% of our budget for 35 years to 10 organizations, if it had been truly dispersed, what the face of Nashville might look like today. So those are all the people that I think should talk about it. And we should talk about it in terms of reparations. This is taxpayer dollars. That is not their entitlement. And it's also interesting to me that often they would trot out things like, well, we're doing outreach, right? We go and we show so many free shows to North Nashville, which is, again, heavily predominantly African-American, or we do so much work in the South Nashville. And so I asked them, well, in a city with $130 million surplus of the budget, why are there Title IX schools that you have to be working with, right? Like if you have a surplus, there shouldn't be a Title IX school. Even if you don't have a surplus, you shouldn't have a Title IX school, right? Like, because that means that the school is so impoverished that you have to do all these other things to prop it up. Instead of changing the system, they always wanted to address it that way. So I think these are the players that needs to be called out, and the mayoral elections coming up in another year. And like if I borrow from Two Black's framing of laundering black rage or laundering ruling class, in this instance, he's he kind of borrowed the ruling class, regardless of whether they were white or of the global majority, to ride into the mayor's office, and he hasn't delivered on anything he said he would do, and he colluded with the Metro HR, legal, procurement office. We can talk about the disparity study that we went into to prevent us from continuing our work. So really, at the end of the day, it's the mayor's responsibility to hold this.
That's very interesting, and I will add, just for my own desire to be honest, that I do not like DEI as like a practice. I think it's bullshit. I think it's a title that gets slapped on something so people can pretend that they're doing something in order to, change whatever it is that they claim they're going to change via this DEI office. So I in my mind, the minute you say like there's a DEIA office that's part of Nashville that's supposed to be working to ensure equity, I already know it's full of shit, and they're never going to ensure equity, and that their job is to present a list of check boxes that they can claim they checked off so they can pretend that they're seeking to do anything for the actual community, while literally they're doing nothing. So I just wanted to say that out loud. I'm on
moving on
with DEI in general. No, go ahead, Daniel.
No, sorry. Or they end up moving people into the ruling capitalist class, right? They're not, the change that they think they're doing is to get people from the global majority into managerial positions so they can continue holding power the way it is. It's not to change the system, right? Like, and so for me, I often differentiate between anti-colonial and decolonial. Decolonial is saying, okay, we can take the colonialism out, but the structure is somewhat intact. We can hold on to it. And anti-colonial is like, no, we have to do away with the whole system and start with a new practice, or borrow from our ancestral practices, right? Just not the white supremacist model. And so I would often tussle with the CARE committee on what they meant by anti-racism, because for them, it meant pretty much getting people of color into the ruling class, as opposed to changing the systemic barriers. And a lot of the changes I was suggesting would help the lower class white artists too, right? Like, so they made it all about the global majority, but the Thrive artists, even at the highest funding scenario, only 40% were from the global majority. That meant 60% of the Thrive artists were white, right? And they still felt that was too much, that what we were trying to do was too much. That was just representing the population of Nashville. And they still felt that was not enough to go to the white community. So that's what they struck down.
And I'm curious also, so part of the problem when rich people start saying, well, you can't survive without us, is because they're looking at how these projects are often initiated with the funding of someone within their group, right? So you named the woman, I can't remember the name, I apologize, right? But so you have these rich Europeans who pool their money together and start an organization so they can say, well, we're going to save these projects. And then this is what happens, right? Like, the project is always going to remain, Martha Ingraham, thank you, Daniel. So, the project also, so then the project remains a process to only support the things that these people want to support. So always the issue becomes that you get the exact answer you got, which is, well, we gave this money to begin with, and we had an intention when we gave this money, and how dare you seek to to share the money that we gave with people that we have no interest in supporting. And so I wonder, what are the solutions outside of these, outside of like Metro Arts, outside of this commission? Like, are there any options outside of this, this funding that exists that would allow for people to actually be able to do the things that they want to do without relying on these funds? Because unfortunately, there is a part of what they're saying that's true, right? Like, if I give $1 million to something and you decide you're going to take part of my $1 million and do something with it that I don't want you to do with it, like this is the problem, right? Like, this is the problem with capitalism in general, but this is the problem. So are there sources or other things that exist outside of this Metro Arts and Thrive grants or anything like that that the community can use as a resource?
So I'll first say, I think what's different about Metro Arts is that this isn't like it's not a foundation, it's not a philanthropy wing, it is tax dollars. So that's what makes this fight impacts the full Metro scope, because this is an issue within all of Metro that the money is not getting to the people who are providing into the pot, right? And keep in mind, Tennessee does not have a state income tax, so all the tax dollars are federal or from our sales tax. So it is heavily, heavily, heavily dependent on our community members. And Nashville is a huge tourist hub, the wrong kind of tourist, but yeah, and a lot of that is built on our community members who are building up downtown and the country music industry as well. And so that's the sales dollars that we're seeing. So that's why this fight, from the sense that I get, a lot of our community members don't want to, it's important to wrestle with it because it's fundamentally extractive from us and fundamentally taking away from the working class to give to downtown. So it's a much harder struggle than to, push back against the foundation and say, we're all boycotting this foundation because they've just peeled themselves into our lives and are extracting from us. That said, I think Christine can also share a lot about the mutual aid effort that we've built here in Nashville among artists. And I think as well, I don't know if I should say this, but I think a much larger effort that I would like to see in Nashville is a deliberate choice not to invest in these organizations that are harming and taking up the funds in Nashville. And I would like to see our community members, that's kind of what I would like to build up to, our community members invest, instead of the symphony and the Frist art museum, to invest in each other and making sure we're bringing in those dollars into our communities, and we can build out those projects. And that takes a lot more, something that we're hoping to build too is a lot more connectivity between North and South Nashville, which are the two bases for the global majority in Nashville, and making sure we're connected to each other's art projects, because art is still happening, whether it's funded or not. If we all know, artists are endure and are, they will create. There's nothing going to really stop them. And so we want to build on that energy and make sure community members are, let me mute this, are connected to each other in those projects and collaborating. One of the successes of Thrive is in funding an individual artist, you'll see like these projects have multiple artists involved. It's not just that fund is not going to just one artist, but like a full community scope. So it's always ironic when the art monopolies are telling, when we ask them, why should we fund you? Why should we continue to fund you? And their response is that we have reach. And then individual artists also have reach. or their responses. We put money into BIPOC communities, into we fund Black artists once a year in February, and we do our best. And it's like, yeah, but those funds can directly go to our people, right? We don't need to reroute that money through a white overlord to give that to us. We can manage our own funds, and we can build our own communities. So that to me is like the importance of this fight too. I've even seen artists, like, we've been to like community meetings where there have been artists of color who've even used language like, you can't give direct funds to artists because they're not trained to manage money. And like, to think about the colonized mindset to say, you need a white person to manage these funds for you, and you have a person of color, agreeing with that. And so we've pushed back against that narrative too, to say, no, the symphony has gone bankrupt twice, and our tax dollars have bailed it out. It runs a deficit every year, but it still gets city dollars. So don't look at yourself as saying, like, I don't have a fully fleshed out idea, I'm not sure. Apply for those funds. Collaborate with other artists. They're not better than you. They're not trained. They just can call the mayor and get a bailout. So that's a very long answer, but I think Christine has a lot more fleshed out.
Yeah, I will just concur that I am certainly tired of the prioritization of privileged voices. So with the mutual aid format, which we were so grateful to get to participate in, specifically a mutual aid community art show and micro grant program through the SALT weekly mutual aid fund that had been going on in previous years, but last year we were invited to be part of that. So we had a show, we were able to fund 8 artists working in community. And so part of this is that we get to hear from voices that we haven't heard enough from. Part of it is recognizing, for instance, these BIPOC artists who are of the global majority, have very much important, relevant things to say, to get out into the community here, whereas many have been edged out of the conversation or only specifically allowed to participate in events curated by white voices and only allowed to represent their work in these very narrow ways under the auspices of this Western art form that has been prioritized. For instance, Daniel brought up earlier that 10 organizations, large, mostly white-led organizations, had received 70% of those funds. We even heard an administrator from the symphony saying, oh, but that's where I want my tax dollars to go to. We're a Western country. That's completely ignoring what the actual makeup of our population is. And then also we have, for instance, I myself am a queer Jewish artist who supports the liberation of Palestine. So that minority identity, I know that, for instance, if I have to work with a fiscal sponsor, my voice is likely going to be limited and my message will not be received in the way that it is intended or created. And so supporting these community spaces for unfettered expression is key to true art making. Artists are the visionaries, right? We imagine the way forward and we listen and we observe and we look for the ways that we get it wrong and we look for ways to recreate in a more correct way, in a constant evolution. And so that fertile ground that exists in creative realms, in communities where creativity is supported, that uplifts all of us. I mean, realizing that, right? We had that golden moment when we were seeing progress within Metro Arts, and now we continue that out in the community. At the same time, observing that the government that is supposed to be serving us, the laws that are supposed to be serving the people, are actually edging out the majority of voices. So, I mean, we get noisy. We see that our voices all lifted up together definitely make waves. they could have done what they did without any notice. But Lydia got on the phone with me and we invited in the community and we had a complaint and it got national attention even, and it won. And yet they still continue to retaliate against the community here in Nashville and keep trying to consolidate that power, consolidate the money, and perpetuate their systems. And they just seem to be interested in the glad handing and the lip service and the photo ops and using BIPOC artists as props without actually engaging with the message. So that's very disappointing and shows the necessity of us continuing to work in community and lift up these community voices.
Thank you. So I want to make sure that I'm not remiss, because I do have a question that I don't even know actually if anyone can answer, but I know there was a little bit of controversy regarding payouts to artists and funding that Metro Arts did have access to that didn't actually get to the hands of the people who were supposed to get those funds. I don't know if any of you are aware, like at this point, where that process is, if anything. I just want to make, I always do my research outside of what our guests send us. So I just want to make sure that that I ask that question, because I think it's important also to acknowledge, like, are there missteps? Are there things that went wrong that were also at the hands of the folks who were trying to do something good, but in the process of trying to do something good, whatever else happens, because that happens, right? And so I don't know if anyone can kind of address where that process is at this point, because I know now that no one's actually with Metro Arts, who is on the inside left, who is fighting that battle to make sure that those artists who were supposed to get funding get their funding.
Yeah, I can kind of continue the story through the fiscal year 2025. So we had anticipated when we filed this Title VI complaint in September of 2023, there was going to be retaliation, and we knew there was going to be backlash, because that's what happens when you speak out, like we started at the top of the show. But it was still important for us. There were 4 main artists who worked on the complaint, and there were over 80 artists who signed on the complaint within a span of a few weeks, right? So they signed on as impacted parties, and we submitted it to the Metro Human Relations Commission. And they took on the complaints. There was a lot of politics around it. We had just gotten our new progressive mayor, Freddie O'Connell, and his campaign manager, Scott Dietz, Scott Dietz's father, runs Metro Legal, is a terrible, I'll go ahead and say, I'm not his biggest fan. And he was confirmed in October of 2023. And so he tried to wrangle out this Title VI complaint from Metro Human Relations. He has a lot of drama with the Community Oversight Board here, with protecting the police. That's his role in government. So yeah, so he's been in hot water simultaneously with the arts situation. So since then, when they weren't able to wrangle out the complaint from Metro Human Relations, they decided to fully retaliate. So they launched a sham audit to say it's not fiscally responsible. The conclusion really of the audit was to say it's not fiscally responsible to fund individual artists. It's not within the charter. It's not. So they started working on that. They launched an HR report against Daniel and his leadership. And they were withholding the funds as well, and trying to pit a lot of the small organizations who receive general operating with the Thrive artists. So they were saying a lot of things on the record that were false, as you can imagine, to try to pit artists against one another, to try to pit staff against director. A lot of accusations were made during this time on the record. I'm not going to go into detail because it gets into the nitty-gritty. And they stopped cultural planning, and this is now in the top of 2024, February 2024, March. And they started saying Thrive actually as a program is illegal, and we need to move it out of the government, and we need to privatize it with the other guy who ran for mayor, Hale Cato, who runs the Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee. which is the big multi-million-dollar philanthropy wing of Nashville. So they were like, we're going to move our city tax dollars into the community foundation to give it to artists. And at that point, in the midst of our Title VI complaint, we also had to launch a campaign against that narrative and against privatization, because they framed it as, we're protecting Thrive. Don't you peasants want some money? We're going to move it into the foundation. And we had to say, no, that's not in our best interests. And of course, a lot of artists at that point, we had to do a lot of the framework to say privatization will not benefit us long term, and it will not get us the money long term. It's going to deny us a lot of funding, a lot of transparency around how the money comes about in the decision making process for that money. And obviously, the Community Foundation is a non-equitable funding source, like most foundations. There's no hope in regulating that effort, right? So we had to launch that very quickly in 2024 to stand against privatization. And it became a major clog in their wheel to do this. So they pivoted after, and at the same time, they also released the funds and said that they would pay the highest amount to all people, to all artists. So the artists won their money back in March of 2024. And they were working on denying them the funding for fiscal year 2025. And Daniel, thankfully, had opened up the applications in January and was getting ready to score the applications and to get the process going. But they halted all of that to try to delete those applications. So people who had worked hours on these applications, had put in the time and effort to design projects and budgets, were then, there was an effort to say, we're not going to be able to fund these projects. Artists stood up against, we sent emails, we signed petitions, and they pivoted to a fiscal sponsorship model, which they launched at the end of 2024, beginning of 2025. And that was done in conjunction with Metro Human Relations, which had been the organization that had really triumphed the Title VI report. So they had come out and said, this is discriminatory. And it was because of their report that Finance and Legal, and because of our advocacy, led to the release of funds. So it was, like you were saying, Renee, like an effort from Metro Human Relations to say, like, this is the best possible outcome because they want to privatize. And we, of course, did not buy that. And we have been standing against fiscal sponsorship. And what's really fascinating about it is that it is a tremendous amount of paperwork on them. So the bureaucracy to add fiscal sponsorship to Thrive, so to force all Thrive artists to work within these institutions, is a tremendous amount of labor from these bureaucrats in the government. But they are still trying to enforce it, just to show you like the kind of the expanse of racism, is that they would rather add more labor to themselves than just distribute these funds into the community. And because of that backlash, artists are now, the money is coming through for fiscal year 2025. There was a chance that they weren't even going to get it. Many of us did not think because they said they were going to cancel those applications. So the money has come in kind of by force this year. And I always quote Fred Hampton, those who dare to struggle, dare to win. So I think the more we speak out, it may seem like it's, you're losing a little bit every time, but you're winning, I think, in a greater sense of like building up a community of artists who are coming together and they're collaborating, and they're also, every single time the narrative becomes stronger. Every single time there's, oh, wow, this institution is not working. There's no need for dialogue. And the more they act like this, they are chipping away at their legitimacy, and they are chipping away at people having, artists having faith in government and in this solution, and it's radicalizing people to see, you know, them be aggressive and them, you know, say things like, what are artists going to do with this money? And for them to rewrite the narrative in front of us. And artists now are very aware. I even had someone yesterday approach me and say, you know, the mayor also, to kind of pair this up with other struggles in Nashville, is going through a major displacement campaign. Nashville has been going through a housing displacement for several, maybe a decade now. But he is clearing out Old Tent City, and very aggressively and violently. And there was a housing organizer who approached me and was like, you know, we really need an Arts Equity Nashville in the housing space, because it feels like every single time, like the backlash and the struggle that we are facing, at the very least, we just need the alternative narrative. We just need somebody to come in and our community members to build this narrative that what's happening with this mayor is not progressive. Clearing out for a new condo is not progressive housing. It's not affordable housing. So yeah, I think we've built up a community of folks who are watching this effort and watching how, and that to me is like the success, is like, it's not about, maybe there are losses in the middle of the way. And I say this because I know organizers get very disenchanted and feel like there's no point in speaking. There's no point in filing a complaint. There's no point in organizing. There's no point in doing a teach-in. But there is. We were able to secure the funding for this year. The money is trickling in. And the next goal is to get rid of fiscal sponsorship entirely, and to show them how that money that y'all did all of that, and for what? It was more work for y'all than anything. So next step.
Thank you. I would love, if you all don't mind, we're on that thread, if maybe you can point us towards some of the artists, and maybe if there are any groups on the ground that are doing this work to try and counter the fiscal sponsorship. I can't remember where I don't know if it was the op-ed that you wrote, Daniel, if it was somewhere else, the list of fiscal sponsors that don't charge any funds for people to sign on and get fiscal sponsorship. And so I'd be curious about that, and like that side of it, if that's okay, if folks wanted, if you could point me in the direction of people who can talk about like the current fight that's happening, that would be helpful. Daniel, I see that you actually put a note about the disparity study and the cancellation of the cultural plan. Do you want to talk about that real quick?
Sure, yeah, I'll do it really quick. I know we have to finish. So, again, I'm doing really reform-based, boring-ass work, right? Bureaucratic. So they said if I tried to do a disparity study, I could then move forward with more anti-racist practices. The disparity study is based on a 1989 court ruling that if it could be proved statistically that there's a disparity, we can then work to rectify reparations, right? So we worked with a disparity consultant who worked with the same firm that advised procurement on the disparity, ran the disparity study, and the disparity was so huge that they didn't have a sample size to even run the power test to then begin running the disparity piece of it. So it's like off the chart disparity, right? And of course, Metro Legal then called the firm that helped us set up a disparity study, and they recanted and said our methodology was not legally defensible, and therefore they could do it again for us if we paid another $150,000. They were the one who gave us the methodology to begin with because they were already in contract with Metro Procurement. So then we went to the Metro Procurement director who ran her disparity study and said, hey, first of all, you should have included all departments in your disparity study, but you ran just for procurement. But is there any way we can use your procurement study for arts? And she said yes. And I have emails and meeting recordings from her that said yes. But then under pressure from legal and Kevin Crumbo, her boss, she backed down. And, so it makes me feel bad that a leader of color who's been working within the system, the reform space, for a disparity being addressed had to back down after publicly agreeing that this was a possible way for us to take, right? So this shows the power, again, of old money, that they don't have to ever be present or show themselves. They can just throttle or choke any attempt at change. And the last thing that I wanted to say was that when I got there, they had launched a cultural plan. Again, the cultural plan was done by the ED deciding who they were going to call, predominantly large organizations. And I said, was there a public call? Could people nominate themselves or say, I want to serve one? There wasn't one. And so rather than go through a process that was different, we added the missing pieces, the individual artists, the artists from the global majority who were under budget into this cultural plan. And as soon as they saw the makeup of the cultural planning committee change, the mayor's office and the legal and procurement found reasons why they couldn't move forward with the cultural plan and stopped it. So again, this is just ways in which, if you want to think about what's happening in Gaza, of how the settler colonial decides how much food gets in, when it gets in, how much medication gets in. It's similar to that. They're choking us off as much as possible in as many ways as possible, from getting funding, from doing a disparity study that can prove we need funding, from moving forward a cultural plan that involves artists. And by creating a fiscal sponsorship approach, it also forces censorship back on, because the fiscal sponsor doesn't want to take on a project that might affect their general operating funding, right? So all of those things were really difficult fights that Lydia and Christine are going to move on forward. So,
thank you, and thank you, Daniel. You offered to let everybody see your bird. Can you?
Oh yes, I'll be right back. Yes, 1 second.
And then we'll wrap. Christina and Lydia, while Daniel's doing that, do you have anything that you want to add in closing before Daniel comes back?
Christine, do you want to plug the website and joining the coalition? And if you want direct updates, we have a solid Instagram that we keep updated on what's going on locally, local projects, and also what's going on with the commission. So, and our website is really amazing. So, Christine.
Well, Instagram at Arts Equity Nashville. Follow that for the latest, and Lydia's spectacular coverage of the live Metro Arts meetings and other related Metro meetings. On our website, artsequitynashville.org, you can click join the coalition. Yeah, we are fighting this backlash. We made some progress. We won that money. They took it away. We won it back. They've thrown everything they could at the equity work to try and undo it. But equity is written into the mission. It's written into the purpose. And once we have these conversations, they reach this conclusion. So thank you for having this conversation with us.
Thank you. Daniel's birds.
Share the birds. Alice after my grandmother and George after my father.
Awesome. Daniel,
Thank
do you want to
all.
add anything in closing before we let you all
No,
go?
I appreciate you all giving us the time, and I also really appreciate this your work on the podcast. I've been listening to it for many weeks now, so I wanted to thank you all for the work you do in providing this service to journalism. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all so much.
Right on. Thank you all very much.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Take care, everybody. All right, Renee. That was great. We moving.
I know we got rolling. We just gonna roll.
We just gonna keep it rolling. So to talk about his forthcoming or their forthcoming book, forgive me, Garrett Felber is here to join us to talk about Martin Sostre and their forthcoming book on this underappreciated revolutionary. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I didn't know I'd be coming on after Birds, so I hope I can deliver.
Do your best, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Do what you can,
If it helps, Garrett, I didn't know you were gonna come after Birds either. I would.
Okay. I just want to be clear that I will not have any sort of. It will just be me talking. So. No, thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much, Garrett, for joining. So everyone, on Wednesday, May 7th, if you are in New Jersey or able to get out to Orange, New Jersey, my abolition group, in coordination with some other folks, are bringing Garrett in to talk about his new book that's about to come out, which I'm very excited, to kind of have this opportunity to talk about a continuous struggle. You can pre-order. The book actually gets released on Tuesday for folks who are able to get to New Jersey. We will have copies of the book, and Garrett, I believe we have pressured into sitting around to sign copies of the book at the end of our event. But Garrett, do you want to introduce yourself and let folks know kind of like who you are and how you ended up down this space of really making sure that people understand who Martin Sostre was?
Yeah, for sure. I'm Garrett. I use they pronouns. I've most recently been organizing with Study and Struggle. We support radical study groups in prisons, mostly at state designated women's prisons in Mississippi. I'm currently working on building a radical mobile library out in Portland, Oregon, where I live. And Martin, I really first became aware of Martin Sostre's work about 15 years ago. I was working on my dissertation, which became my first book on the Nation of Islam's organizing in prisons. And I came across Martin's name and, just did a Google search. And at the time, there wasn't a whole lot about him. There was a Wikipedia page that mentioned, his frame up in Buffalo for running a revolutionary bookstore during the uprising of 1967. And so I found his address and just wrote him a letter. I was trying to interview him, and he was basically like 90 years old and told me he was too busy, and sent me a bunch of primary sources. And we wrote back and forth a little bit before he passed in 2015. And I was just, I was fascinated by his work in The Nation when he was inside as a jailhouse lawyer. I was interested in his book selling. I was interested in his writings about revolutionary struggle. Then I found out about all this community work he was doing in New Jersey in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. And so that just kind of led me to decide to try to piece all that together into a biography. So that's what I spent the last 5 years or so doing.
Ray, sorry, go ahead. Did you want to?
No, you go. You go.
Well, I just wanted to pick up on what you just said there, and admittedly, I am thinking about this weekly series I've been doing on 100 Years of Malcolm X, and I, in reading this interview that you did with Truthout that Renee sent me earlier, because I don't know much about Sostre, so this is all fascinating. I've already pre-ordered your book. I'm looking forward to I've only been learning about him at all over these last few years, to be honest, just recently. But in that interview, it is mentioned that it's Sostre's work in the Nation of Islam while in prison as a jailhouse lawyer that he reaches out to Malcolm X. And initially, when it's brought up in the interview, I was a little bit worried because we don't get to read of Malcolm's response immediately. So it's for a second I thought, oh man, I hope Malcolm didn't miss the letter or ignore the letter or whatever. And thankfully, as you point out, he did not. If it's not too much of a detour, could you talk about, because I know this is part of Martin's development, somewhat politically and somewhat like Malcolm's. Could you talk a little bit about their interaction and to whatever extent they had a relationship? Could you talk about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wish I knew more about the intricacies of whether they corresponded with one another, how the mentorship happened. But Martin was basically part of a group of incarcerated Muslims at Clinton and Attica during the late 50s, early 60s, who were being persecuted for their organizing and religious beliefs, and who, really led by Martin's jailhouse lawyering, were filing these cases that were first ostensibly around access to the Quran and things like that, and then second about sort of the punishment that they were undergoing for their religious beliefs about solitary, the loss of good time. But historically at that time, imprisoned people have no constitutional rights. So to sort of access any of these rights, it's really actually raising a much larger question about, do imprisoned people have constitutional rights? And that's the broader context that they were asking Malcolm then to come to Buffalo and testify as an expert witness, because what the state was trying to do was say, this is not a legitimate religion. You know, this is in the parlance of today, right? They would say a threat group, terrorists, you know, at the time they were calling them a hate group. So it's the same tools that the state uses, right, to delegitimize, you know, liberation struggles and say that these are hate groups. And so Malcolm goes and testifies in court in the case where Sostre is a plaintiff. And so there's actually this interesting kind of interaction where Sostre is testifying, and he gets himself into kind of some hot water when he's testifying, because he's pretty, he's not placating to the judge or anything like that. And Malcolm kind of has this exchange with him where he's like, oh, you know, basically like this person kind of is misunderstanding or misrepresenting Islam. And the reason, and I think it's strategic, right? Because Malcolm's saying, like, if he had better religious instruction, he would understand. And it's like, because that's what Malcolm's doing, right, is to say, well, what we need to do is actually be allowed, ministers need to be allowed to come into the prison. We need to send religious
and then he wouldn't be making these mistakes.
Exactly. Then he wouldn't be making these mistakes. And one of the other things that I just love about that story, and this comes up in Orasami Burton's book too, is that Malcolm was coming in as a Christian minister. So he would put on the garb and come in and say he was a Christian minister, and that's how they were getting the lessons in. So yeah, there's a fascinating history there.
You're welcome, Jared.
Thank you indeed.
So I have to say, I also know very, very little about Sostra's history and the story, and it's been fascinating since, you know, Greg reached out and said we're going to do this book release to kind of read some of the information and to learn a little bit more. And I think we need to like ping you to come back so we could talk more, like beyond, like there's a book release coming and everybody come out, because your research is fascinating. Like what I've been reading about some of the things that you did with your PhD and, you know, your first book that you released, I'd love to kind of get more behind those things also as we go. But you know, you know, I shared that article from Truth Out with Jared because I felt like it gave a really good, both concise and like in depth, just like where you come from with this and trying to make sure that people understand how important it is to really get to learn, right? And to get information. And you say something at the end of the article that really struck me because it feels like something that I always like. It's a way, I don't know how to explain it, but it really kind of just struck me because it's exactly how I like to think about things. And you were talking political education, and you quote Tony Cade Bambara, but then you say, I think the role of the educator is to make revolutionary ideas accessible. Some people will be drawn to art and cultural production, others to books and the written word, and still others to care work and developing relationships. In a world that needs to be reimagined and rebuilt on every level, we can't afford to struggle narrowly. And it was just, I need to thank you for, I don't know if you were like talking off the cuff or if something that you say regularly.
No, that was an emailed response, so I will pass up to that.
But it's
like that.
It's beautifully stated, and it's something, you know, part of a lot of the things that I argue with people about all the time within my organizing spaces, that like our job is to bring people out, right? And to engage in conversations and to not just, you know, have these kind of surface level things where we present things, but to actually engage with the community in a way that they can ask questions and really and try to like gain more from it. Can you just talk a little bit about kind of like what, you know, so you write this book, the book's going to come out. I'm hoping that you'll get more people who want to like have conversations with you and discourse, and that people will read the book. Can you talk about like, what's your, like, if your dream came true about like what the result of this book coming out would be, what would be the end result for you?
Wow. It's funny to write a book and never like quite pinpoint that, you know? I mean, I wrote the book I'll say first off, like I wrote the book really with incarcerated readers in mind. Like I've been sending manuscripts to my comrades inside throughout the process, and I think like that's one of the like smaller goals, is just for this book to really get inside, and for people to see the ways that Martin struggled from the inside. And I think for people outside to understand the role of incarcerated people in revolutionary struggle. Like there's a section in the book where I talk about this conflict with the Boggses, with Grace and Jimmy Boggs and Martin, about whether Martin was engaging in what they called like a sort of struggle for himself, because he was resisting so-called rectal examinations. And they were like, he's building a Sostre struggle. And he was like, no, I'm a one-person version of the Viet Cong. And so he saw his own resistance to sexual assault inside in relation to, you know, liberation struggles around the world. And they were like, oh, he's building a movement about it around himself. And so the reason I really like spend some time on that in the book is because I think it's a great example of how even revolutionary organizers can discount the role that imprisoned people play in revolutionary struggle. I see Jared's about to say something.
I mean, because, you know, you said one man Viet Cong.
Now listen, that's called my.
That is very animating for me. That is very, you know, and in that article, you know, you talk about Martin's, you know, the propaganda of deed, which I really like. The idea that even one person's solitary individual action, which we don't often think, or I think we're not often encouraged to think of in terms of collective struggle, but just one person's activity is itself propaganda. And you use that example of resisting those invasive examinations to say, you know, in that moment, it can't be collective. You're by yourself. You're trapped. So I'm a one-man Viet. Oh, that is awesome. So yeah.
So to answer your question, Renee, because I started narrowly, I think the broad goal, like the thing that would be my dream scenario, is not just that people, you know, I think there's a growing awareness around Martin Sostre's life and struggle regardless of this book. Like it's been really encouraging over the last 5 years through the work we've done with the Martin Sostre Institute and events and things. So I think people will know Martin. What I would hope for is that people know Martin's ideas and struggle in a like kind of material way, that when people talk about him, it's not to just kind of add him to, like Robin writes in the foreword to the book. I really appreciate this. He's talking about this t-shirt of like more Malcolm than Martin. And he sort of uses that t-shirt to interject Martin Sostre into the conversation. But what I would hope for is not that just people now are like claiming a new figure to, you know, quote or mobilize or to tear some other figure down, but like that they actually engage with the ideas in the book and like apply them to their own struggles in the world. So that's what I hope, is that they can find ways through either Martin's struggle or the people who struggled with him and around him. Like I try to give attention to all of those people, because, you know, there are things that Martin does in the book that not all people are going to be willing to do or find themselves in the position to do. So I hope that there's ways that they can see other people engaging in revolutionary struggle that appeal to them or feel like on-ramps.
Can we get an example of what you think you mean that would make that would make people uncomfortable in terms of what he did? Or
well, I mean, you know,
like to do?
Yeah, so he withstood, you know, almost a dozen brutal assaults by prison guards, right, to make this decision not to submit to rectal examinations. Even within his own context, he talks about how there's 2,000 people at the prison he's at and only maybe 5 who are willing to join him. He's calling for a strike against sexual assault, basically. And there's maybe 5 people who will join him in that. And part of kind of what I try to do in the book is like, he's really frustrated with that at the time. And he's like, he likens it to a boxing match. And he's like, there's a lot of people who want to see the boxer get hit, but nobody wants to get in the ring. And that's real. But I also think there's these ways that kind of, you know, from writing a book, from my perspective of all these years later, I see the continuity of people who are still resisting these searches inside in Martin's legacy. And so his resistance to it radiates outward, right? Even though not everyone's going to be willing to do that. So yeah, that's just one example that comes to mind.
Yeah.
Now listen, that's called my boy.
You know, we do take bars requests sometimes. So, you know.
Garrett, I want you to know that it's almost unheard of for someone who has been on screen for 15 minutes to get the bars twice. I just want you to know.
So I should just get off the call now. I won't take any invitations to come back.
You know, in the article I did read, there was something I cannot wait to read the book. I'm not proud of how late I am to this work and this man's life and all of that. But there's a point in the article or the interview where you talk about how Sostray's reading of Marxist Leninism was negative in that it encouraged people not to act. And I have to admit, I'm not clear on that. How he or anyone would arrive at that. Similar to my thoughts on Afro-pessimism, by the way, but that's a whole other can of worms. But you know, like because when obviously the Panthers are an easy example to point to as a Marxist Leninist inspired group that obviously acted. George Jackson clearly was not unwilling to act. I don't feel discouraged from action when I engage those ideas. So could you say a word or two about what we might maybe read more about in your book that he argues along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, I think he was responding to both the idea that there is a sort of revolutionary condition that people were sort of searching for, like what are the things that make for revolutionary conditions, and the way that that sort of thinking might lead people to say, well, is it now or is it now? And he was like, you make revolutionary conditions, right? They're around us all the time and all these opportunities, and just take action. And that's what both builds those conditions and they're ever present. And I think too, he saw organizations that would take what he saw as kind of anarchist spontaneous action, like the 1967 uprising in Buffalo. Like he signals that as his first awareness of the revolutionary potential of anarchism, even though he doesn't really identify as an anarchist for maybe 6 more years. And what he sees is the way that this spontaneous action in the streets then gets kind of disciplined by organizations, which during that time were mostly Marxist-Leninist, and kind of like funneled into a party line. And he was seeing that and saying, look, this is a way that this kind of revolutionary action then becomes subdued, funneled into like, well, what is our line on this? What is our line on that? And that's, I think what he was talking about. And, he's also coming out of like in that moment, this very specific break with the Workers' World Party, where they had been supporting him. They were part of his defense committee, and he breaks with them in 1970. So he's having, I mean, it's not like just a abstract argument he's making. It's one grounded in.
And it sounds like you said they shelved his book as a result. That's trifling. Shame on them. They should have put the book out, break or not. But
well, anyway. I think it was more like he didn't have anyone. They were the ones who wrote the book, so he was kind of counting on them to like be getting the book out. So it's not
which
so
they still
like
should have. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah,
even if they had an issue with him or broke with him. But all right, yeah. Renee,
the last notes. So Garrett, thank you. I know this was short. we are definitely going to circle back to you after the book comes out, because I do think it's probably a worthwhile venture to talk a little bit more about what's in the book and some of your other research and things of that nature. Is there anything that you want to add kind of, to close out about Martin or about the book? There's a link on our run sheet to order the book from AK Press. There are 2 places. I didn't only drop the one link because that was the one that was available through the Truth Out article. But I understand that there are 2 places that if people buy the book from either those bookstores, a copy will automatically be sent inside for someone who's currently incarcerated to get access to the work. So I want to make sure that we allot the ability for folks to support in that way. But is there anything else that you want to add, before we close out?
No, I think thank you for having me on. If people want, in the meantime too, like you don't have to just buy the book. You can check out the Martin Sostre Institute and read some of Martin's writings. The New Prisoner is this incredible analysis of, in the immediate aftermath of Attica, of Martin thinking through, the role of incarcerated people in revolutionary struggle. So checking out some of Martin's writings. And then also I'll plug the Justice for Geraldine and Martin campaign out of Buffalo. His co-defendant, Geraldine Pointer, is still alive in Buffalo and calling for her exoneration. She did over 2 years in prison and lost custody of her 5 kids for the frame up. So there's a cool movement happening there to reclaim the space of 1412 Jefferson, where the Afro-Asian bookstore was, to get her name cleared. So I think they're on Instagram. You can check them out, Justice for Geraldine and Martin. And thanks again for having me on.
No, definitely look forward to having
Thank you.
another discussion or two when the book comes out. Congratulations. And
Definitely.
salute to AK Press for that arrangement too. I like that you all are doing that.
Yeah. And, folks in Jersey, again, pull up. We'll be at the Hub in Orange on May 7th. The event starts at 6, and Garrett's going to be in attendance. We're going to view one of the documentaries about Martin as part of the event. I'm very much looking forward to meeting you in person, Garrett. So, everything's become so online that you don't get to do that often. But
3D.
I know, right? So thank you. Thank you very much for coming on and really appreciate your time.
Right on. Take care.
Same. Thanks, y'all.
All right. Very much looking forward to that book.
Seriously. I'm fired up. So, and I always like being part of these little things. Like, we got the call and I didn't ask Garrett about it directly, but the organizer who brought the event to our attention, and Sandy passed away recently, very unexpectedly. And Sandy was at the core of everything that we were planning and doing. And so one of the things that we'll do at the event is kind of make sure that we give respect to Sandy and just kind of how this went down, because I believe Sandy was also part of helping with the connection between Garrett and Martin and making sure that the work got done. And so I'm excited for Wednesday. Of course, my son's school has an event on the same night. So I'm going to go set up, get started, go do the thing for my son, come back. This is my life though. I can't. Life be lifing, man. I can't get away from it.
Life be lifing. Yes, indeed. So, well, listen, folks, please do make sure you like, share, subscribe, put this in your socials, support the Patreon, blackliberationmedia.org. The website's in the show description. Big salute to all of our guests. And make sure you have the bell rung so you don't miss things coming out later on and all weekend. And this has been dope. This was a
good conversation. Thank you, Jared.
Thanks
for the chat. Undefeated
as usual. Again, as always, peace. Only if you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say. We'll catch you next time right here with more Saturday with Renee.